We also saw the launch of MrBeast games this week with another podcast interview from Rosanna with Mrs. Rose. Now, within this interview, we meet a lady who took part in the games. Also, Rosanna claimed that she had a traumatic brain injury from taking part in the games. Rosanna points out that MrBeast does claim that he's dropping a lot of behind the scenes on the show when the show is released, and it was released, and I've seen quite a lot of the behind the scenes personally. I've watched episode 0 of it and a handful of the behind the scenes episodes that have come out from the games, and my personal view, as I've already reported a few shows ago, is that it's very likely that MrBeast and Amazon are probably going to okay and not okay footage, right? Because they don't want any more fire to be added to the scandal that's currently happening in regards to allegedly the concerns or the misconduct or the alleged organizational concerns that happened on the set of episode 0, the MrBeast Games version, and it was slowly but steadily, and that's been confirmed in some of the BTS that I've watched, and I'll leave links down below for those who are interested. But it did sound and did feel like there was it was becoming less and less YouTuber as the Amazon team took over in that respect as well, because obviously this is an Amazon Prime show, so it was moving and sliding more towards television as they moved into episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, episode 4, etc. in that respect. As it seems that it's been almost big YouTubers who've created good PR or good marketing to come out and ask yourself if you see any footage, did something go wrong, and would they allow that to be in the final edit, or would they cut that out specifically? No, right? And again, this is just my view. However, personally, it's something I would keep in mind for those who maybe have not seen it. I will leave links down below. However, as I don't feel I can add more, I won't be specifically reacting or talking to or sharing specific React content related to MrBeast games specifically. It's a nicely done production. Obviously, there's concerns with it that we've already discussed. In this episode specifically, I wanted to focus on what we learned from Rosanna's podcast interview with Miss Rose. So that's what we're going to be focusing on for the rest of this story. At the start of the interview, we hear some of the reasons behind why the interviewee, Miss Rose, joined the games in the first place. She claimed that she used to idolize or work, and she had a background in the psychological understanding of game theory and how it works, right? So this suggested that she would be someone who had understood game theory and wanted to come on the show. She also claimed that she was one of the chosen 30 to 40 people who were mic'd up at all times as by story producers, something that I personally found very interesting when watching the games from behind the scenes point of view, was that the number of story producers helped the editors already know the best bits as it was live taking place. So their job was to write down noted live time code. So those who don't know, time code is a way of syncing in MrBeast's case, hundreds of cameras onto the same number. So, for 1 minute, 1 second, for example, you can jam every single camera so that it's all synced up, and then the same moment can happen in all of the footage at the same time. But also what was happening is the story producers would write and make notes on those specific time codes to say, well, this thing happened, we watched it live, and we think it's a good thing that could make the cut, because it's one of those things where you have to trim a lot down, because you're only going to have, say, a 10, maybe mostly 15-minute video. How are you going to go about doing that unless you're willing to cut 95% of the footage that was there, considering they're also running nearly 100 cameras as well? So she did explain in her own experience a little bit about how the communication efforts were very poor in regards to getting back to emails, to the point where she had to basically say fuck it and ended up driving to Los Angeles. That was only a 6-hour drive. By the morning, around 9 a.m, she claims she did eventually find out what, to the morning of her leaving for Beast Games filming, she did know what hotel she was in and she did know what plane she was in, but of course she then ended up having to drive because of the lack of communication from the MrBeast team. Miss Rose also claimed at this point in the interview that she drove herself home after nearly 6 hours with a concussion because she had believed that she had been kicked. She claimed that while she was driving back that she felt sleepy and she was struggling to keep her eyes open. Miss Rose also claimed that she understood that the challenge would likely to be mental and physical, and that she would likely be in the bottom few percent when it came to physical due to her age and the others taking part in the games. However, she did believe within herself that she could be better at the mental games and then work out what was going on and what the best play would be. Miss Rose also talked about how she got into the first game, and it was pulling in, if those who haven't seen it, it was put to pull a group, so each group was 100 people or so if I recall correctly, and that was to pull a big rock above a Pacific line. And she talked about the fact that there was a unfair quote unquote talk of the red team losing, mostly because there was more women in the red team, so they were potentially going to be less physically strong, and this was a physical game because they had to, as I say, raise that boulder high into the sky and get it to a certain line. They also talked about the fact that MrBeast did say no pushing or kicking, and clearly in the world where MrBeast didn't want anyone to get hurt, and it came to who touched the case when we're talking about now the second game specifically. And it was one of those situations where because he could see, he was on a pedestal and there was lots of people watching from the top of the stadium looking down, there was a lot of conversation within this podcast that the Miss Rose couldn't specifically see all of the details of the actual where the briefcases were laid out, because she was only seeing it from her perspective down on the ground, when if she would have seen it from above, she would have seen that she could have been cut off in where she ran. But we'll cover this a little bit later. I just wanted to highlight some interesting or potentially reasoning, not really sure why Rosanna did this or why Rosanna's editor did this, but there was some interesting cut marks in regards to how heavily it was cut in this part of the podcast. So this is normally done to cut out ums and ahs. This is normally done potentially to remove slight context or slight sentences. So this is something to keep in mind. If you do want to view this in the podcast itself, it's around 17:40 overall, and I'll share what was said, followed by where I saw the cuts as well. Quote, in terms of my injuries, cut, what I didn't expect is in the grid there was, and there would have been especially cut to be cross-traffic cut. This is a very important point, cut. I wasn't able to view the game before my round, cut. So, cut. When people watch it on YouTube, there is going to be camera views and overhead cameras. So again, as I mentioned previously before reading the quote, a lot of this could be, actually a lot more was said that doesn't potentially align with Rosanna's agenda or opinion, or showcasing what specifically she wants to showcase or highlight, which is that MrBeast is a horrible individual, that obviously there was issues and concerns and he shouldn't be held, he's not, there's nothing that he hasn't, there's stuff that he's obviously done wrong, etc. But I think it's important to also call out and also say and also highlight when Rosanna has, or Rosanna's editors, I imagine under Rosanna's guidance, has made, in my opinion, potentially too many cuts, and how that could be questioned when it comes to editing the podcast, etc. Because the question would be, what's being cut out, right? So I think for me, if they wanted to have a story that's more believable and a story that's more understanding, then surely having less cuts, even if there was ums and ahs, which they've done previously in the podcast that I'll leave linked down below, surely that would be better for them, because that's going to be less likely to put you in a position where you can then be called out for these kind of cuts specifically as well. The same is true of the following statements at 1923. Now, why I'm making this point, you may ask, as someone who does edit podcast style content for clients, as recreating words and removing ums and ahs and other filler words for me does question what are they trying to cut out. The key point of this podcast, and it's a key point in this podcast because the whole point of this podcast is talking about how she was injured and how it potentially had a knock-on effect to the rest of her life. So it is a red flag for me by the fact that they're cutting so much. With this partly being heavily cut down story, Miss Rose also explained that she thinks that she was the female contestant that was tackled and knocked down by a male player within the same game who ran down the centre and then cut in. As I was alluding to earlier, she claimed that she couldn't see the fact that it was a grid pattern and the fact that there was big gaps in the middle where a male contestant could run down and then cut in to get the briefcase. The goal of this specific game is some were eliminated, some were safe, and you had to touch a briefcase to keep it, and then you were in a position where you were either eliminated or safe in that respect as well. Miss Rose also claimed that below from her right, and then she suddenly realised that a very strong survival instinct. Luckily, I scrambled up and she was able to get on her feet, but she was certain it was a guy who went into her. She ended up getting a case through the as the chaos was unleashed. But what she did say, she seemed or questioned whether it would be one that was red, which would I'd say or claim or showcase that she was going to be unfortunately removed from the game. And for whomever, as she said, well, she looked fine, Rosanna claimed it's likely to do with the level of adrenaline or etc. While she was, quote, dazed and confused. She also claimed that she told Carl, hey, I just got knocked down, check the tapes. I was so much in the game that I said if I got knocked down and I touched the case before the guy who did it, surely he should be eliminated. Instead of me. She also claimed that she got kicked in the head, and she claimed that she was the female in the story, which we hear that was being told in between, and that was kind of rumoured, I guess you could say. When Miss Rose was asked for an exit interview, she and was asked if she would come back to a MrBeast production, she said yes, of course. But Rosanna claimed that she would only say this as she was, quote, dazed and confused and had concussion, end quote. Miss Rose also added, I didn't appreciate what had happened to me, and it was really took weeks on the couch hearing the stories coming off Rosanna's platform from the New York Times and some other stories from a Dog Packs video, like we shared in the last episode, that were Dog Packs largely misrepresenting or largely misinforming a lot of the claims that he made. It may have come from a place of goodwill, but from the coverage we've already discussed in the previous episode that I'll leave down below, it sounded a lot more like it was actually just a begruntled employee who was pissed off at MrBeast specifically. And, you know, it's quite difficult, and I think that by obviously the potentially anyway, Miss Rose didn't realise that Dogpat had misrepresented. So personally, I think she would have a stronger case if she didn't use Rosanna's platform there, but also mention Dogpack as well, because I think for me, if you just mention, you know, the New York Times and there's some of the stories as well that have come out from quote unquote official outlets, then it will make sure that people potentially consider it more credible than, you know, Rosanna, who clearly has built an agenda. And the counter argument that has been said from other interviewees that we've covered on the show as well is that she's clout following. The same with Dogpat, and it was quite interesting to see that Dogpat hasn't made an appearance on Rosanna's channel from what I can see. since the Soggy Cereal video, debunking a lot of what Dogpat, and obviously that podcast that we talked about with MrBeast a couple of weeks ago as well. Moving back to Miss Rose's claims, however, Miss Rose did wish that to impact some change, and at least for me and for her to do it, she felt it was right. Rosanna claimed that she has also been on TV style shows, and claims that it's most likely to say nice things on the exit interview because you haven't had time to process what's happened, because moving so fast and it's in the excitement and the wild chaos. Rosanna did make the point that MrBeast claimed that they made a big point of looking and reviewing footage when it came to disagreements and fairness within the game show that you can see within a lot of these BTS videos that I'll leave a link down below. But the point, I guess you could say, that Rosanna wanted to do was showcase and see if she could review all of the footage to see and highlight potentially some of the issues that took place, and to see whether Miss Rose specifically had actually been hurt in the way she claims, and you know that this had happened, and she wanted to see and wanted to investigate all of the raw footage. Now, it is a lot of footage that would cost a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy, but she claimed she wanted to do it. So Miss Rose wanted to also claim by speaking out that there was potential reduced chances of further injuries, but the risk, of course, for legal ramifications, and frankly, any lawyer worth their salt would not recommend doing an interview, or wouldn't say come and do an interview like she was doing specifically. Rosanna claimed that she had spoken to 200 people who took part in the MrBeast Games production, and nearly 50 of those people who had either previously worked or worked for MrBeast, and they, quote, they all said the same thing, that the set was specifically dangerous. Miss Rose also claimed that she did sign a liability waiver, and there could be a risk of death. Miss Rose claimed that due to the fact that she was small, 5'2", and she didn't see the whole game, that she wasn't 100% aware of the risk of getting crossed into that was created because of the MrBeast production assistants weren't allowing them to see the full game. As we've seen in the full edit, as I say, they didn't have access to those top camera view, so she didn't actually be able to see the fact that there was a cross pattern in the middle to allow a contestant to run up and then cut in. Miss Rose also claimed that she got hurt and concussion was early on the Saturday morning, and it wasn't until the Monday that she realised she had a goose egg on her head, on the back of her head, and as well as understanding the rest of her symptoms specifically, she then had to drive herself home, as we've already alluded to, so the 6-hour drive back home. By Monday, the headaches and the nausea began, and then I realised that I had a concussion and went for urgent care. Miss Rose also claimed that she had bruised ribs as well as bruising on her calves. Miss Rose then goes onto how long her recovery would likely be a year, and why she was potentially doing this interview, as we've already referred to. She also claimed that she was at her peak when it came to just before the games, and there was a significant decline afterwards. She also said that it wasn't able to do the same work that she would be able to do from a cognitive ability point of view. So, quote, we are as the poorest we've ever been in a very long time. She also claimed that she's going to be posting a 2-hour fact-filled, end quote, video that goes into all of the details on how and when the facts could be created, and if and when she needs brain surgery. She did talk about specifically the fact that she made that video as a potentially a legal representation of what had happened, so she could give that to a legal representative to potentially, and then of course the police, to potentially go after Jimmy. I haven't watched the video in full. If you would like me to, I may cover it in next week's show, or next time we do a show, so let me know in the comment section down below if there's demand for that. But near the end of this nearly 2-hour long conversation at Miss Rose's channel, where she goes into more details, I did actually find the video, but it took me to a unlisted video where the comments were turned off by Miss Rose, the comments below, and there was a statement that I'll put on screen now, specifically as well underneath that video. that's what we found out. Personally, I think it does say a lot that she's unlisted the video. Does she still stand by that video? I don't know, right? I will be talking potentially more about that video in detail, but I think that with some of the other things I've already discussed, I feel like there's a little bit more to this story, and I feel like maybe some stuff could have been wrongly represented as well. Obviously, if she has been knocked over or ran into by a male contestant, then of course that's not okay, and of course that needs to be looked into, and you know, arguably it's actually on MrBeast to ensure safety on a production set. However, we've already discussed the concerns or the issues when it comes to that production and how it went about in that respective as well. So I'd love to hear what you think about this interview, and of course leave links down below for those who are interested, but I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below.